Good afternoon, everybody. We're delighted to be here with you today to talk about lean portfolio management in practice. Myself, Deema Dajani, I work for Scaled Agile. I'm a product manager in an SPCT that has been focused on the field of lean portfolio management and evolving that IP. And paired with me is the amazing Marshall Guillory, VP of Government Practice of Agile Rising. So if you have not heard, lean portfolio management is now in the mainstream. You are seeing it as a staple in Gartner conferences and other industry research. So it is no longer an emerging trend. It has definitely crossed the chasm. We have one early indicator that shows that. The LPM class itself that we introduced a couple of years ago has been steadily growing, and this past year has surpassed any of Scaled Agile's other advanced classes. It actually was #1 running class, to our surprise even. Most of those instances were within private enterprises, not public classes. That's another indicator that lean portfolio management transformations have been picking up and on the rise as well. We hear it from customers both in private and in public sector all the time, more so in public sector. That's why Marshall and I are here today. So what we set out to do starting a year ago with all of those LPM implementations going on, we thought, let's get back in the field. Let's examine several of those implementations and start to understand and distill what are some of the success patterns. How are people actually implementing and operating their portfolios? What is working? What is not working? What can we bring forward into our guidance to help other change agents like yourselves to implement LPM successfully and have it sustained? So in here, we've distilled a couple of lessons that we'll share with you. The first being alignment, followed by a big rock, which is funding, moving your funding model, and then finally tooling. So these patterns start with alignment. We've basically gone back to basics of change management or change leadership, to be more accurate. We've partnered up with the Carter Institute, and we've embraced their latest thinking, how to really bring in and institute large-scale transformation that is sustainable. So we take a lot of those change leadership lessons and weave it into the lean portfolio management implementation roadmap. One example here is about enlisting a volunteer army. This in itself is a shift in Carter's guidance from the older days leading change, where change was more of a synthesize and push towards the audience. Now it's more of a pull. Let's generate enough demand and engagement to have the change initiative reach a natural tipping point so it can fly and sustain in a healthy manner afterwards. So yes, LPM implementation is a change journey. Let's take a couple of those examples that we found in the field. The first one is, like any change journey, you want to establish a sense of urgency. It is a complex, multifaceted, multi-year journey that requires a compelling enough case for change so that everybody in your organization at all levels can rally around it. So here's one example. Quantify the cost of delay. In one instance that I actually experienced, we downloaded the project and initiative information for that one organization. We averaged it out and we looked for representative initiatives. And we found on average, they were taking a year or a year and a half to build and deliver major capabilities. But when we traced it back to when it was initially an idea or a market sensed opportunity, it was at least twice as much time. So the delay was 3 to 4 times what the actual delivery was taking. And then imagine if you take it a step further, which we did in that instance. So pairing up with the marketing sales organizations and understanding or quantifying some of those sample initiatives, what it meant to have delayed it a couple of years in the market. What did it do to your market positioning, potential revenue, potential cost averted? All of that can be quantified. So now you can address the numbers-minded audiences with real data on why you need to move to LPM. Another approach is a burning platform. There was a financial institution that was faced with significant compliance concerns. Imagine when the most senior leader communicates to the organization, unless we fundamentally change how we do things, we are no longer going to be in business. You want to take that case for change, effectively communicate it to all levels all the time so you can rally everybody around it and start to build that support base. At the same time, this helps address the side effect of complacency, which we tend to see in some change journeys. So, case for change, let's move on, the people. Rather than defining roles, we found there's many different roles in your organization that touch LPM. Your investment decision makers, these are your fiduciaries, your influencers, value stream owners, functional leaders, even the strategy roles in your organization. You want to be able to work with these roles on a regular basis. So we articulate a cadence. Portfolio sync is one of those lean portfolio management cadences that you want to engage them on a regular basis for continuous decisioning. You're creating a continuous flow process. Then you have support functions you cannot forget: finance, legal, HR, audit. So imagine the impact to them and how you would engage them. There's another cadence on a quarterly basis where you would want to bring them in, have them in the know, and even at times allow them to be part of the change journey. Epic owners who foster the epics, we already have that very well defined. Obviously, they're the ones coming in, making the pitches in these cadences. Then you have the implementers of LPM. This is your LACE and your change agents. And then you have the facilitators of the portfolio. Some organizations realize later, I need a person or a set of people to run the day-to-day operations of the portfolio, separate and distinct from the coaches. And then finally, people within the value stream. Those you want to engage within COPs, implementation working groups, and don't forget the customer advocates. They play a role and they can help build your momentum as well. And then with those folks, how do we bring them together? Well, imagine you've left class, you've attended the Getting Started with LPM workshop, and you have a few weeks, you want to set in place a high visibility event called the LPM Kickoff event with all the stakeholders. You want to pull them together to start to form the vision for change, to make some early decisions, the scope of the portfolio, some of the elements in the LPM implementation plan and its sequencing, the design of the events, finalizing the responsibilities. All of that can be co-created together and communicated in this event. On the right-hand side, I give you an example of a half-day possible agenda. This is only a sample. In some organizations, this may work out. In other organizations, as Marshall shared earlier, you may want to break it up into multiple working sessions over several weeks. So whatever we give you in this guidance recently, take it as an example, but tailor it for your local context. So with that, I think you're ready to go tackle the next big rock, which is funding. So Marshall, what do you got for us?
Thank you, Deema. I really appreciate that. We'll now discuss the second component of our LPM practical experience from the field, which is funding. Particularly in my space, most of my experience is in the government space, and right now we're serving government customers. And the context can be a little bit different when we think about how we actually go through the design and discovery process of exploring value stream funding. Private entities, commercial operations, and governments fund value streams in different ways. Although there are some similarities in the language, many times we learn that the language is very different, so we have to adapt. What we like to do and what we've experienced with multiple clients is going through that definitive phase of discovery and really not just discovering artifacts, but getting the right people in the conversation that perhaps are already part of your guiding coalition, or they're a future part of your volunteer army that you need to drive change in the organization. For us in practice, this means meeting with the organizational component that we are currently involved with change, matching the pace of change to their ability to consume it, and then going through the implementation roadmap steps. It's important to remember that we use SAFe to build SAFe. We also use SAFe to implement SAFe components. So the LPM function is really implemented in an iterative and incremental way, just like we do with any product. So once you understand the context and we have our language settled on what is OpEx versus CapEx, or whatever the language is that that organization uses that are the equivalent, we can begin the discussion about budgeting and how to actually translate the model of how the organization funds probably projects prior to a SAFe LPM implementation to actually funding value streams. So understanding that current context is super important. What we find that works, as Deema mentioned, in some organizations, we can do the big bang and we can follow the LPM course with a definitive kickoff working half day or day. And then we can move on to the operational steps of truly building out the process and the tooling necessary to function as an LPM. Other times we have to spread that out over perhaps months because of availability and other reasons, and we do it with various workshops and shorter time boxes. The next thing I'd like to mention, when we think about the guiding coalition and the various stakeholder groups that are important to a functioning LPM, is coordinating and collaborating with the PMO. In every instance of an LPM implementation, in my experience, we've involved the PMO from the beginning as early as possible in transformation process. This is the case with my current clients and hopefully future clients as well. By working with the PMO, you can begin the process of educating and giving them the knowledge about LPM as well as the Scaled Agile framework. And this will help soften the blow when they do finally read Mick Kirsten's book and they realize that we're asking them to change their mindset from project thinking to product thinking. And there's this thing called flow, and we're going to really ask them to change fundamental elements of how they manage perhaps to an agile PMO. So getting them involved in the process of creating and defining what the new processes will be is really important. So next, I'd like to talk about tools. With regard to funding, tools can be an important discussion. Most often, we will not go in and ask an organization to change their financial management system of record. That would be a little bit off the top. But we do need to look at the current system or old system and the ways of managing work and where information is stored about the work that is in the backlogs, for example. So even if there is pre-existing agile practices, there are some clients where the work is actually stored in multiple systems. There is relatively low transparency in some cases, or not enough transparency, which is a core value of SAFe. And we really need to rethink following the practices of building an architectural runway, for example, and allow the emergence of the challenges that are in the current system to come to light so that when we're designing the new system of record, it works for the people actually doing the work, as well as managers and executives and customers as well. So establishing a single source system of record for managing work is incredibly important in maintaining that continuity that we really need to drive accurizing data for funding value streams. This gets into the LPM guardrails, where we think about capacity allocation and capacity management. And it's a necessary element, of course, of an LPM function. And finally, with regard to funding, I'd like to discuss the translation exercises. Many government organizations, they obviously use subcontractors or contractors to facilitate the process of achieving the agency's mission. For example, with my NASA client, their mission is all about space exploration, for example. So the business side of that organization exists to serve the missions. It is a fundamental operational component of making sure everybody gets paychecks and they can do the financial reporting to Congress, et cetera. So they have existing contracts and have existing funding models that are often based off of contract deliverable line items in a contract. And on the government side, there are work packages that they use to manage funding, which is translated to and from project funding, so that they can accurately create budgets for that government agency on a yearly or biannual basis. When we ask governments to fund value streams, we must start with a level-setted discussion. We have to first give the knowledge, and then we explore what the current processes are, and we begin to build the connections for them with familiarity to what we propose and safe on how we actually manage funding value streams. Oftentimes what I've observed is that there are many different cases where the systems are very familiar and the language doesn't have to change dramatically. But we do need to document and visualize the components of existing processes and work packages or funding models to translate them into how we will fund value streams, and allow time for the organization to create the necessary changes in the system to adequately meet audit findings, for example, so that they don't have issues with audits when you change over, as well as to give people time to learn what it's like to actually establish flow and move away from project funding models to funding a value stream en masse, for example, for an ART or a large solution train. Now we'll move on to preparing the financial management function. So once we've established and designed our new model for operating and funding value streams, we need to actually put LPM into an operational state. Again, this is done incrementally and iteratively as we slowly build on and improve the system until it operates according to the goals that we set out in our transformation plan. So providing the financial data to support EPIC decisions. Some organizations have different sources for financial data that may come from the PMO. There may be some financial management data that comes from the PMO and is managed by the PMO. But then often we also see that individual government organizational units have their own financial data and their own budgets to manage that don't always necessarily align with the project information in the PMO. So we have to make sure that we source the data and accurize the data as much as possible when we move over to the new models. The LPM then makes the funding decisions, which is in the guidance of the framework, to fund the value streams. So the value streams themselves, the development value streams, the ARTs, have a funding allocation that is related to the guardrail that is relevant to that. We then execute. We're doing program execution. We are then able to, after a PI or two, report on the profitability or progress towards mission goals or financial goals, depending on the organization. The reporting function is a critical element of having appropriate tooling. If you have multiple manual processes or multiple, disaggregated systems that have to be aggregated into manual reports, for example, classic PowerPoint commandoing, we'll find that slows down flow in the system because decisions are often tied to reports. So we really do need to make sure that reports are integrated and automated to the extent possible so that we can make the system flow at a sustainable pace. We measure our initiatives and EPIC performance, of course. We need to apply the startup way. Therefore, we have to apply the relentless improvement pillar in our house of lean. And we need to know whether EPICs are meeting the objectives of the strategy of the organization, as well as the OKRs, and of course, the goals of that EPIC that are outlined in the go decision for that MVP. When you're thinking about the future state of budgeting, oftentimes budgets are done behind closed doors with offsites or very senior leaders and executives with minimal or oftentimes no input from the teams, the people doing the work. Participatory budgeting has been in SAFE for quite some time now, and it is a critical part of your LPM implementation. And you'll want to begin constructing your plan for the first participatory budgeting session with your stakeholder groups to affect your budget early in the process. This is outlined very clearly in the articles and the guidance and the framework, as well as by other artifacts that Scaled Agile provides in the community portal. So participating in asset capitalization, there are numerous ways in which you can go into an organization and provide general guidance on how they're going to provide asset capitalization. I recommend that you have familiarity with the organization's current financial models so that you can give them good consulting and good coaching advice on how they're actually going to apply their investments and manage and govern their investments as part of your SAFE implementation. So moving on, how do we actually connect the CapEx and OpEx to the people that do the work, going from strategy to execution? This is a picture of one of the artifacts that I've utilized in one of my consulting engagements. It is an integration of John Doerr's work from his book, Measure What Matters, where he kind of establishes the way in which we approach use of OKRs. And more particularly and more interestingly is creating the goal setting framework. So what we use as a consulting engagement as part of the educational, knowledge part of the transfer and implementation is to help the customer understand what the goal setting framework is. So we give the customer some reading assignments, of course, and we create a goal setting framework. That, of course, is based off of OKRs, and SAFE specifically ties the OKR strategic themes. And when you think about your tooling, if that's settled as part of your discussion, it can be very easily managed in various top tier tools that are in the marketplace. So we go through the process of educating the customer on what is it really like to establish a goal setting framework and then to govern against our goals. SAFE's guidance on this is very clear, then it flows through the portfolio vision and the canvas, the business canvas that we use for that. Applying design thinking is a critical element built into building out your portfolio canvas as you integrate those different postcards from the future, if you will, so that everyone has an equal voice into the future. And then finally, implementing, practicing lean portfolio management. So the tools become important. And when you implement the tool, it has to carry forward the same language on how we're funding. In other words, what are the products and services in our catalog, our taxonomy that we use in our organization, and how does that relate to the funding model and the value streams? And building all that into your ALM allows that much more automation and ability to create meaningful reports. I want to take this time now to remind everybody a very important principle in the Agile Manifesto, which is simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is absolutely essential. Some of us, myself as a recovering software developer, love software tools. I absolutely love them. I want the most complex, amazing, detailed, fully featured software tool you can imagine in my heart. But then the mind takes over and you really realize we have to keep it simple because not everybody is as passionate as a software developer about software products. So the system itself that we are designing, because we are in fact, using SAFE as an operating system, a second system, the system we design has to be as simple as possible, especially in the beginning. This means that even though we may buy an amazing software tool, we may not want to use every single feature in the beginning because it can be quite complex and the learning curve can be quite deep. So choosing a tool, of course, is an analysis process. We want to do this iterative and incrementally as much as possible. We have to look, of course, and do the discovery at what our current tooling is. What can we turn off and save money? Maybe there's some old tools, that can be deprecated and are no longer needed, and we can save the budget for those enterprise licenses. Perhaps there's some old processes that don't take into account or are not compatible with an agile and a flow-based way of working. So that in and of itself is a large part of your implementation roadmap and your plan. We, of course, need to tap into the guiding coalition and your army of volunteers, create working groups to manage the transition, because oftentimes the capacity is just not there to tackle everything that we're doing in the guiding coalition and tooling. If you're a government organization, you have to follow very specific regulations with regard to evaluation and acquisitions. So you go through that process, which is a fair amount of work. And then next, remember, when you select a tool, always include the training. People should not be expected to learn the tool on their own. And I've seen some very, very good consultants go through and offer office hours as one of the simplest ways to affect, especially in remote work, where we can't corral people into a conference room or training room somewhere, is to just simply hold office hours on a daily basis. It becomes a very effective way for people who are in the volunteer army to come in and learn about the new tool, to help achieve the objectives of your overall transformation, and to build a very high quality implementation that has good data in it that is useful for decision making and planning and executing and building products and services. So another big takeaway that I've observed in several implementations is that we need to be very cognizant and diligent in making sure that all of the people involved in the portfolio understand that we're asking them to move all of their work into the tool. Not the work that I'm doing for SAFE and then all the work that I'm doing for these projects is not in the tool. We cover the basics of fundamental cross-functional teams. When you're on an Agile team, you're on the Agile team 100%. The work moves, not the people. So it's really important, because in every instance, we find that there's some laggards in that. And if you're thinking about your reporting mechanisms, it can really damage your data if you don't really have all the work in the tool. So it becomes a process of coaching and discipline and education, but it's really important to consider where all the work is. Where is it, and where is it all tracked? And make sure that's all in that one tool. Of course, we always retrospect, we improve, we iterate, we inspect and adapt, and we continue with our plan. So I wanted to give you guys something real in this presentation from a real implementation, and not just some examples on slides. Even though I guess I just walked into that one, this is an example on the slide, but it's an actual picture that from NASA. And this is Jira Align. I've been learning the tool over the past 6 months myself personally. And I can tell you that it's pretty powerful. Particularly, my favorite part of it is what's called the strategy room. And because we place so much emphasis in the SAFE guidance on organizing around value and connecting the people who do the work to the actual enterprise strategy, how do you actually do that? It's one thing to say it, but to actually implement it and see it in real life is a completely different thing. The interesting thing about this tool is that any individual that has access to Jira Align, which in my client's case is everybody, they can go here and they can literally click on the NASA mission to the OCIO core vision and core values and their part of the mission. And they can walk all the way down what they call the strategy pyramid to their ARTS program objectives from the current PI. And then they could consequently go and look at the OKRs that are related to the strategic objectives, their strategic themes in the portfolio, and see all of the information that will be used to measure their success as an enterprise. So it becomes a very powerful information tool that creates a natural alignment between your value streams. And I've observed that it's been very effective, even in a short time that NASA has been using it in this particular part of the organization, to help everyone have transparent access to information and to really allow those emergent details to affect good future decision-making. Great quote here, Simon Sinek, well-known business thought leader. Takeaway for you guys, and I'm going to turn it back over to the much more amazing than I, Deema Dajani. Words may inspire, but only action creates change. I take this one away every single day as a consultant, an SPCT, and a career change agent. So I hope you do as well. Thank you guys for your time. Deema?
Thank you, Marshall. So we wanted to leave you with a call to action. We know this is a lot, and we know many of you are already venturing into this journey, either starting it out or perhaps you need a little pick-me-up to advance it a little bit. The advice we're going to give you is you always have to start with a solid foundation. You want the change agents that are going to be responsible for implementing LPM, understanding the full system and how it interplays with each other. So please do go ahead and attend or teach them the LPM class. It's a 2-day investment, well worth your time. Followed by, there's a 1-day workshop that we recently released that completely overhauls how you get started with LPM, and it incorporates many of those lessons that myself and Marshall and other SPCTs have been researching in the field. So this is direct guidance and success patterns based on what works. And the guidance in that workshop will get you to successfully do the decisioning and setup and preparation and change leadership steps needed up to the point of the official kickoff event. And then what do you do after class and after the workshop? Well, your journey is going to continue, and it's likely going to be at least a year, maybe more in some cases. We wanted to keep giving you on a regular basis as you evolve your journey, the right guidance and the right assets. And that's where we introduced this online asset called the LPM Practice Guide. You can find it on this URL listed here. It was constructed with the research that Marshall, myself, and others have pulled together. It is sequential to take you from the early days of your journey to mid-days to more advanced, following the broader LPM implementation roadmap. We've already released a couple of modules, and we continue to release more modules. So we encourage you, please do go back and leverage it. This is designed to help you and aid you in the journey way past leaving class and the workshop. We wish you all the best on this journey, and we want to hear from you. The chat pod will be active while we run through this presentation, and both Marshall and I are here actually to answer any questions you have. So please feel free to drop in your questions. And thank you, Atlassian, for inviting us.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.